The Untold Dark Rituals of the English Knights. Legends tell that English knights were made of steel and faith, but the truth, hidden beneath centuries of silence, is far more disturbing. Imagine the scene. The moon scalloping the stone walls, the biting wind sweeping the fields, and the echo of distant bells announcing not only devotion, but also fear. Within the fortresses, young men were led to torch-lit halls, where the oath of chivalry was not limited to honorable words. It was a plunge into the abyss between light and darkness. What presented itself to the world as honor was often sustained by trials of pain, submission, and secrets never to be sung in poems. The people saw the knights as guardians of the faith, but no outside gaze could penetrate the rituals that shaped their souls. They marched with the cross on their chests and swords in hand, but they also bore invisible marks, tormenting fears, silent pacts made on dark nights, and memories of rites that seemed more like cruel trials than sacred celebrations. Each polished suit of armor hid a man who had endured trials that history preferred to forget. This is the starting point of the narrative, not merely to glorify, but to expose the hidden, dark, and disturbing side of English chivalry. For there, where society saw only the image of immaculate heroes, a reality of pain, blood, and silence echoed. And it is this brutal contrast between glory and shadow that takes us to the heart of the untold rituals. In the heart of the Middle Ages, England was a stage of brutal contrasts. Kingdoms at war, nobility vying for territory, and a people marked by famine, disease, and an unshakable faith in a church that governed not only bodies, but also consciences. It was in this turbulent landscape that the English knights were born, figures who would become the shield and sword of their time. Every castle built, every wall constructed, and every bloodied battlefield reflected the need for men prepared not only to fight, but to represent the very order of the medieval world. The church legitimized the power of chivalry, transforming warriors into symbols of devotion. The knight was presented as a defender of the weak, guardian of widows, protector of orphans. But beneath this impeccable image lay a much more complex purpose. Knights were also instruments of intimidation, used to maintain the fragile balance between faith, obedience, and social control. Their rise was shaped by public ceremonies replete with splendor, parades, blessings, solemn vows before altars, but also by practices that unfolded far from the public eye, preserved as secrets of the military orders and the nobility itself. This historical context is key to understanding the weight of these dark rituals. In a time when power was sustained by violence but masked by religiosity, every gesture, every word, and every symbol carried a double meaning. Chivalry was not just a military discipline, it was a carefully staged theater to uphold a greater order, where honor and fear walked side by side. From childhood, future knights were shaped by relentless discipline. At 7, they left the comfort of their homes and began serving as pages in manor houses, where they learned etiquette, obedience, and religious devotion. At 14, they became squires, absorbing the codes of war, the art of the sword, horsemanship, and above all, blind loyalty to a lord. Each stage was marked by public ceremonies that extolled courage and faith, creating an almost sacred image of men destined to serve God and the crown. However, behind the watchful eyes of society, hidden rituals existed, designed to test the physical endurance and psychological submission of these young men. The Mask of Honor was sustained by a carefully constructed spectacle. The people saw knights participating in tournaments, parading in gleaming armor, kneeling before altars. These acts, visible and glorious, were designed to inspire confidence and awe. Yet behind the scenes, there were trials that had little in the way of nobleness. Forced fasts, solitary vigils in dark chambers, imposed silences that forced the mind to confront its own limits. The masters of chivalry knew that only by breaking the body and soul could they forge utterly obedient warriors. Thus, the rise of English chivalry was not only a journey of bravery, but also of sacrifice and control. Each knight was simultaneously venerated as a hero and molded as a prisoner of a system that combined glory and pain, faith and fear. The official image was of immaculate honor, the reality of preparation marked by shadows. When the squire finally reached the age to be knighted, the transition wasn't limited to a solemn ceremony before the nobility. Secret rituals, hidden from the eyes of the people, shaped the warrior definitively. In silent chambers, lit only by the flickering flame of torches, the young man underwent trials that combined pain, fear, and faith. During the Vigil of Arms, for example, he would remain fasting for an entire night, kneeling with his sword resting on the altar. But beyond the devotion, there was the psychological toll. The absolute silence, interrupted only by whispered prayers, forced his mind to confront inner shadows. Some occult accounts speak of blood oaths, where the aspirant cut his own skin, painfully sealing his loyalty. Other practices involved remaining in dark chambers, facing the terror of solitude, while symbols engraved in metal or stone were imposed on the flesh, leaving marks that did not appear in official records. These rites were not performed for the public. They were secrets of the order, transmitted only between masters and disciples. Each gesture had a hidden meaning. The touch of the sword to the shoulder was not merely an honor, it was total submission to a code that blended faith and control. The ritual bath before the ceremony was not only a purification, it was also a symbol of renouncing one's individuality. At the end, the young man emerged transformed, not only into a knight but into a guardian of mysteries that could never be revealed. His life, from then on, belonged not only to the nobility, but to a dark and silent order. The Church, which preached the light of the gospel and the salvation of souls, was also the great guardian of the shadows that shaped English chivalry. Behind the stone walls of cathedrals, where stained glass windows filtered the light as if it were a reflection of the sky itself, rites of discipline and spiritual control were hidden, marking each night. Before taking up the sword in the name of faith, they were subjected to rigorous penances, prolonged fasting, entire nights of forced prayer, and floggings with ropes and chains that lacerated the skin while reinforcing submission. Each blow of pain was not only physical but psychological, ingraining in them the conviction that their own will must be nullified before the will of the order. Public discourse spoke of purity and holiness, but behind the scenes, fear was the most effective tool. The Church fostered the idea that any disobedience was not only an affront to the feudal lord, but a mortal sin against God. Thus the knight was kept in a constant state of fear, carrying the cross as a symbol of redemption and condemnation at the same time. The murmured prayers were often accompanied by secret symbols, signs of obedience not found in the sacred books, but which sealed the invisible pact between the warrior and the institution. The shadow of religion was absolute. It promised heaven, but threatened hell. It controlled not only the battlefields, but also the innermost thoughts of each knight. What appeared to be devotion was often a spiritual prison, where every act of faith was also an act of forced obedience. On the eve of battle, when the air seemed charged with omens and the earth trembled under the weight of marching armies, English knights were subjected to the most intense and terrifying rituals of their journey. Inside their tents, makeshift altars were erected, illuminated by the flickering light of torches, where sacred relics were displayed like amulets of power, crossed swords above heads, anointings with oil mixed with the blood of sacrificed animals, and prayers murmured in hoarse voices created an atmosphere that oscillated between devotion and sorcery. There were no outside witnesses, only the warriors themselves, their masters, and the invisible weight of eternity hanging over every word. On some of these nights, each knight would pass before symbols engraved in glowing iron, touching them with their bare hands, believing the pain would shield them from enemy steel. On other occasions, they were forced to swear absolute silence about the rituals, under penalty of excommunication and death. The fear of hell mingled with the terror of the battlefield, creating a psychological force that transformed ordinary men into soldiers, willing to fight to their last breath. These rites were not merely spiritual preparation, they were invisible weapons. They not only strengthened the body, but also shaped the mind to accept sacrifice as an inevitable fate. When the armies met, each sword stroke carried the memory of the previous night. Each charge was driven by the weight of promises made in secret. War for these knights did not begin on the open field. It began in the darkness of the rituals that sealed their souls against the unknown. The true battlefield for English knights wasn't always before the enemy walls, but within themselves. Secret rituals, filled with pain, silence, and submission, left invisible marks that corroded the mind like rust on steel. Many warriors, still young, already bore aged looks, as if each vigil in shadowy crypts had stolen part of their soul. Constant nightmares haunted them. Visions of symbols burned into their skin, echoes of prayers that felt like curses, memories of endless nights when solitude forced them to confront unspeakable fears. The honor they displayed in public was a carefully crafted mask, but behind it lay fragmented hearts, The demand for absolute loyalty stifled any trace of individuality, transforming them into instruments of obedience and violence. Some plunged into states of mystical ecstasy, believing they heard the voice of God. Others, however, were consumed by silent madness, unable to distinguish faith from torment. The psychological toll was so profound that many ended their lives not as heroes of song, but as prisoners of memories they never dared reveal. The bard's songs spoke of courage, but they did not sing of the nights when silent tears flowed beneath heavy helmets. The chroniclers described victories, but did not recount the whispers of tormented knights who feared the shadow of their own memories more than enemy steel. The inner darkness became a second skin, invisible to the people, but palpable in the gaze of each warrior. It was there, in this abyss between glory and anguish, that the true untold war of the English chivalry lay hidden. As the centuries passed, English chivalry began to lose the luster that sustained it. The arrival of gunpowder and the roar of cannons shattered the silence of the battlefields, rendering obsolete the rites that once shaped feared warriors. The gleaming swords, once symbols of honor and faith, began to seem fragile before the destructive power of firearms. Knights, once seen as pillars of order and glory, became shadows of the past, imprisoned in traditions that no longer held power over the fate of war. But while rituals lost relevance in the military field, their consequences remained etched in the flesh and minds of those who experienced them. Many knights grew old with scars that were not only physical, but also spiritual. Red-hot iron brands, memories of extreme fasting, torments of sleepless nights in dark chambers. Some carried their pain in silence, hidden behind titles and coats of arms. Others succumbed to madness, unable to maintain the mask of honor that society still demanded. The fall of chivalry was also the collapse of a theater of faith and power. The people no longer regarded these men with the same reverence, and the church, once their greatest ally, began to lose influence over the warriors and the world. The secret rituals that had shaped bodies and souls for centuries were relegated to fragmented memories, passed down in whispers and legends, like echoes of an age when glory and darkness mingled. The decline did not erase the past. It merely revealed the price that had been paid in silence. Medieval books, written by chroniclers in the service of kings, nobles, and bishops, rarely dared to record the obscure rituals that shaped English knighthood. The pages extolled grand tournaments, triumphal parades, and bloody victories that fueled the pride of a people hungry for heroes. But what happened behind the scenes, the vigils in shadowy crypts, the oaths sealed with pain and blood, the cruel penances, was intentionally silenced. This oblivion was not a coincidence, but a deliberate choice by those who held the power to write the memory of history. The official narrative served one purpose: to perpetuate the image of the knight as a guardian of faith and justice. Revealing the behind-the-scenes story would expose not only the fragility of these men, but also the role of the church and the nobility in keeping such practices alive. Thus, the darkest accounts were buried beneath layers of fabricated glory. Where there was pain, bravery was written. Where fear reigned, devotion was exalted. Where the mind was broken by the weight of secret rites, the parchments recorded only immaculate fidelity. The silence of the chronicles is, in itself, a form of power. What is unsaid shapes as much as what is exalted, and in this silence, part of the truth was lost. Only fragments survived, in hidden letters, oral legends, and apocryphal accounts. What has reached us is a polished story, too beautiful to be real, but disturbing enough to reveal that behind the glory of chivalry, there have always been secrets that no one dared to write in full. The echo of the dark rituals of English knights has not been lost over the centuries. Even today, in the ruins of castles and in the silent pages of history, the memory of men who were simultaneously heroes and prisoners of an order that blended faith and cruelty remains. The legacy of chivalry cannot be seen solely in military victories or the legends sung by bards, but also in the psychological, physical, and spiritual price paid in silence. Every suit of armor preserved in museums, every sword displayed as a relic, bears not only the luster of honor, but the weight of nights of vigil, penance, and oaths that shaped these warriors into instruments of obedience. In modern times, military discipline, codes of conduct, and even initiation rituals into elite orders still bear traces of these medieval practices. Mind control through fear, the valorization of sacrifice, and the belief that true strength is born only through pain are direct echoes of chivalry. The glory that remains in the books is only one face. The other, darker, remains hidden, but still pulses as a silent warning for the centuries to come. Thus, the knights of medieval England were not merely figures from a distant past. They became symbols of an eternal duality, guardians of faith and slaves of obedience, protectors of the people and instruments of terror. History has chosen to sing their bravery, but the shadows that shaped them continue to remind us that all glory is born from the conflict between light and darkness, and that, behind every myth, there is always a truth that humanity tried to bury but could never erase.